It's a job that only 30 people are lucky enough to have at one time in Major League Baseball. It's also one of two MLB jobs, manager being the other, that even the most casual of frustrated fans claim to be at times better capable of doing from the comfort of their couch. The occupation that I'm referring to is the prestigious honor of being the general manager of a Major League Baseball team. While the duties of a GM can vary slightly from organization to organization, the primary duty that so many covet and criticize is the fact that the GM has the final say in terms of roster decisions. Signing free agents, making trades, releasing players, and extending other ones all seem like such exciting decisions to get to make, but they also come at a cost. Yes, the people in these positions are generally well compensated, although most teams do not publicly disclose their pay because, well, they don't have to. But with this power usually comes a high degree of stress. Ultimately, if your team isn't the one holding the Commissioner's Trophy come late October or early November, your fan base isn't happy, and you're the one they're primarily going to blame. While I could easily make a video like this for every MLB team's current GM, and maybe I slowly will, in this video I want to focus on the current general manager of the World Series losing Toronto Blue Jays, Ross Atkins. Why? Not because Ross, like so many other GMs in the sport, has been heavily criticized for a number of his decisions, but because the Blue Jays' recent and somewhat unexpected success has awoken a belief that perhaps some harsh Jays fans may just owe Ross an apology. To explore this, I'm going to dive into a brief history of Ross's time with the Blue Jays so far, the organizational moves he's gotten right, the main decisions and moments that many fans saw as fireable, including the one move that may just make him one of the luckiest GMs of all time, and ultimately try to decipher if he still deserved the boos he heard from some in the stadium as he took the mic to celebrate the team's 2025 AL Pennant win. So let's dive into this. Ross Atkins became the 7th general manager in Blue Jays history on December 3, 2015, replacing interim GM Tony LaCava, but really replacing the largely beloved Alex Anthopoulos, who held the position since 2009. Alex had just spearheaded a team that snapped a 21-year playoff drought, thanks in part to a number of bold deadline moves to add studs like David Price, Troy Tulowitzki, and Ben Revere to the existent murderers row 2-3-4 of Donaldson, Batista, and Encarnacion. The timing of the move certainly frustrated and confused fans, as you don't commonly see executive or managerial changes after a long-awaited positive outcome. Couple that with the fact that Anthopoulos was Canadian-born, and it's safe to say that Ross immediately inherited a tough position for him to be loved. While some fans held out hope for an extended run of contention after the incredible taste that the bat flip 2015 gave them, they also knew that Atkins was handed an aging core with a rapidly closing window, and a less than promising farm system that had been made further bare by the recent deadline moves. In 2016, the Blue Jays made the postseason for a second consecutive year, but Ross received little to no credit as he made no real moves of substance, and the team's success was carried largely by the core Alex had built. It was after the 2016 season that the team began to be more publicly seen as Ross's project. And that's where we will begin our exploration of the key moves and moments since, starting with those that I believe he's gotten right. As I alluded to earlier, one of the tallest tasks Ross inherited upon taking the job was replenishing a farm system that in 2016 Baseball Prospectus ranked as 22nd in baseball, 12 spots lower than they were in 2015. While successfully drafting in sports in general is difficult, doing so in baseball is on a whole other level, thanks in large part to how far those who are drafted generally are from potentially making an impact at the MLB level. Ross certainly hasn't gotten every draft selection right, including the first one he ever made for the club, but he has hit on some gems, including the third one he made that same year. Not every choice has risen through the ranks to make the boys of the show better like Alek Manoah did in 2021 and Trey Savage in 2025, but several of them have been key pieces to acquire other talent, and others are still marinating in hopes of future impact. When it comes to overall farm system rankings, Ross hasn't necessarily helped the team rise as one would hope, with them sitting at number 20 as of MLB.com's most recent rankings. But when he hits, he has hit really big. If you don't believe me, just ask the New York Yankees. The old adage goes that you can never have too much starting pitching, even though in the playoffs it can often largely fall on the performance of 2 or 3 guys. Or in the case of the 2025 World Series, 1. And while teams ideally love to build up a starting staff the more cost-effective way through their system, competitive teams always need to add. And when it comes to the biggest starting pitcher names that Ross Atkins has convinced ownership to either open their pocketbooks for or allow him to pull the trade trigger on, he has done a very good job. Most notably, in my opinion, was the late 2021 controversial decision to sign free agent Kevin Gausman and not re-sign Cy Young winner Robbie Ray. While Robbie Ray certainly hasn't been terrible since that decision was made, especially what he managed to do in a resurgent 2025, he hasn't matched Kevin Gausman's output. Gauss has not only outperformed Robbie in terms of ERA and WAR since both deals were signed, he's also stayed healthy, making 125 starts for the Blue Jays versus the 72 that Ray has made over that same time. In addition to Gausman, Atkins also notably hit with Chris Bassett via free agency, and via trade when he acquired Jose Barrios from the Twins. While 2025 didn't end pretty for Jose, his consistency and contributions since the 2021 move have been huge for the club, and so far, the price paid to acquire him seems to be fairly inconsequential. Ross has also hit on a couple of notable relievers, like when he signed Yimi Garcia and traded for Adam Simber and Trevor Richards, but the reliever game is a dicey one for any GM to navigate, so we won't focus too much attention there. As the sometimes portion of the title to this section implies, this same topic will come up when discussing Ross's fireable offenses, but for now let's focus on a couple of key moments where Ross successfully decided not to, in hindsight, overpay for particular players. Most notably, the bat flip hero Jose Bautista, who at 35 years old was reportedly seeking a 5-year deal in the neighborhood of $150 million. If Ross let fan emotions get the better of him, he could have caved and given the Blue Jays icon close to his demands. But he didn't, and Bautista's numbers only declined from that point forward until his final campaign in 2018. On the other side of the ledger, Ross's decision to overpay and add an extra year to George Springer prior to the 2021 campaign has largely paid off handsomely for the Blue Jays, in terms of output, most notably in 2022 and George's resurgent 2025, but beyond the numbers, George's seeming role in building a more collected and competitive culture has been well worth the investment, no matter how his age 36 2026 ends up going. So now that we've given Ross his flowers, let's throw him under the proverbial bus a bit by pointing out what I personally believe have been his most fireable offenses since taking over. While every new GM inherits the mess left by those before them, they are also always left with at least a few diamonds in the rough, guys that may not be a part of the team's long-term future, but should at least help fetch some assets that will be. In the case of Ross Atkins, the two diamonds I'd love to focus on are Edwin Encarnacion and Josh Donaldson. In 2016, Ross's first year on the job, Eddie was a beast, slashing .263, .357, .529 in the regular season, and with 45 home runs in the regular and postseason combined, including a walk-off shot that sent the Baltimore Orioles packing in the AL wildcard game. 2016 also happened to be the final year of Eddie's contract with the team, and despite his monstrous campaign, Ross was skeptical to sign him long-term. On paper, the skepticism made some sense, given that Edwin would be entering his age 34 season in 2017. But what didn't make sense was what Eddie ended up signing for. On December 22, 2016, Encarnacion signed a 3-year deal with a 4th-year team option, much shorter than most anticipated, with the then Cleveland Indians for a guaranteed $60 million. What really made the decision to not bring back Eddie frustrating for Blue Jays fans was that in November, the team opted to instead sign free agent Kendrys Morales, who had himself a fine MLB career to that point, but was certainly not putting up the same numbers as Eddie, and was only 1 year younger. Yes, Kendrys came in at just over half the price, but the output comparison from 2017 to 2019 speaks for itself. In the case of Josh Donaldson, the writing was on the wall that once the team's competitive window was largely closed after a 76-86 2017 season, he wasn't going to be a part of the team's future. But rather than trade Donaldson prior to the 2018 campaign, Atkins elected to hold on to him, reportedly turning down an offer from the Cardinals that included Jack Flaherty. Ross did eventually trade him on August 31st to Cleveland for what is regularly described as pennies on the dollar for the one-time AL MVP. As painful as those two flubs were, to me at the time, they still weren't fireworthy. Atkins was far too early in his tenure to be given that fate, and a Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette-led future looked bright. But it's when we jump ahead to 2022 that Atkins' future with the Blue Jays really started coming into question. In a shortened 2020 campaign, the Blue Jays made the playoffs when no one thought they would, and lasted in it for about as long as everyone expected. In 2021, the Blue Jays were the best team to not make the playoffs, missing out on the dance by only 1 game. But in 2022, everything came together. The team finally made the playoffs in a season where they were expected to, and found themselves hosting the Seattle Mariners in the wildcard round, as the favorites to advance. But over the next 48 hours, Luis Castillo shoved in Game 1, and a 7-run lead evaporated in Game 2, and just like that, the Blue Jays' 2022 season came to a disappointing end. It was at this point that the Atkins-led regime approached the offseason in what I personally see as a caveman-esque simplified approach. Offense, good. Bullpen and defense, bad. Trade for each other. Notable names gone from the Blue Jays roster before the 2023 campaign were Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel Jr., and the promising Gabriel Moreno. And in were Dalton Varsho, Kevin Kiermaier, and Eric Swanson. While all three of the additions have made their positive impacts on the team, and in the case of Varsho still actively is, the hit of subtracting Teoscar and Lourdes was much harder than Ross likely expected. The Blue Jays saw a drop in average, hits, home runs, and runs per game in 2023 amongst a number of other offensive team stats, and fell even further in those categories in 2024. 2 seasons where most Jays fans would agree that an, in hindsight, not that expensive Teoscar Hernandez would have slotted in very nicely behind Vladdy. Now, before you overreact and hit the comment section to tell me how stupid I am, the time frame I'm specifically referring to with this point is the 2023 offseason, a time when the Boston Red Sox elected to sign Rafael Devers to an 11-year, $331 million contract extension. Devers' career path since aside, at the time, Rafi and Vladdy were largely seen as loose comparables, and were both rapidly nearing their end of team control. Rather than using that contract as a template to lock up Vladdy long-term, Atkins and co. seemed to instead question his value, focusing on the drop in his numbers since his MVP caliber 2021, unsure as to whether he was worth what Devers had just received. Flash forward to 2025, with the Shohei and Soto deals now firmly in place and having redefined contract ceilings, and the Blue Jays signed Guerrero Jr. for $500 million. After what Vladdy did in the 2025 postseason, I don't think anyone regrets it, but it's hard to not look back and think about how much less they could have had him locked up for. Even if Vladdy commanded more than Rafi, there was no world where he would have cost $500 million if signed earlier. And that difference in money spent could have gone a long way in surrounding him with even better talent moving forward. Personally for me, the first moment I confidently felt that Ross Atkins' tenure as Blue Jays general manager was coming to an end was after the Blue Jays found themselves swept again, this time by the Minnesota Twins in the 2023 playoffs. As disappointing as the on-field playoff results were, it was the end-of-season press conferences that were even more frustrating. We all know the controversial decision the Blue Jays made to pull a flat-out dealing Jose Barrios in Game 2 because the numbers said so. But we also know the Blue Jays didn't score enough to make that matter. What was truly baffling to see was the lack of accountability and instead childish finger-pointing that seemed to occur when it came to taking responsibility for the questionable decision. Both manager John Schneider and GM Ross Atkins seemed to suggest that someone other than themselves made that decision. I personally thought they both walked themselves off the plank, but that clearly wasn't the case. After the heartbreaking collapse in the 2022 wildcard round, it became clear that the Blue Jays adopted the strategy that pitching and defense wins championships, which is fine. But when it didn't work out in 2023, and was even worse to watch in a listless 2024, Atkins seemed to be perfectly okay with tripling down on the approach in 2025 by adding defense-first infielder Andres Gimenez and reliever Jeff Hoffman into the mix, rather than addressing the team's clear need for power. It wasn't until late into the offseason that they finally added Anthony Santander, a deal that many fans believe management have been bullied into making. In hindsight, the decision to triple down got the Blue Jays to the World Series, and Anthony Santander barely contributed. But was that luck or genius on Atkins' part? Either way, the opportunity to triple down on a strategy, especially after a 74-88 2024, was certainly surprising. The final fireable offense I personally have on Ross's resume occurred in January of 2025, when the Blue Jays acquired Miles Straw from the Cleveland Guardians. Again, in hindsight, this seems to have worked out nicely for the Blue Jays, as Straw not only stuck with the big club all season, but also played to a 2.9 WAR, while slashing a serviceable 262, 313, 367, and playing his usual stellar defense. But going back to when the deal happened, we all know Straw wasn't the centerpiece of this deal. The main reason the Blue Jays pulled the trigger on this move was the international bonus pool money that the Guardians were willing to send to Toronto if they took on the dead weight of the $13.8 million still owed to Miles Straw over the next 2 seasons. A hefty price to swallow for a guy who spent almost all of 2024 in AAA, and didn't even perform particularly well down there. But Atkins believed that additional pool money could be the difference maker in convincing Roki Sasaki to choose Toronto over Los Angeles. Of course, Roki still chose LA, But even that is not a fault of Ross's, since you can't blame a guy for trying. Where the true fault and possible complete incompetence lies is in the fact that the deal with the Guardians was made in full rather than in principle, with the contingency of it only occurring if the Blue Jays could secure an agreement with Sasaki. Now, I'm no financial expert in the business of sports, and specifically what can and cannot be done, but I do recall a number of outlets covering this decision at the time, and many of them made it seem like not only was making the deal in principle possible, but was actually actively done by a few of the other teams in pursuit of the Japanese right-hander. If that's true, how Ross Atkins held onto his job after what at the time seemed like such a costly blunder and display of unnecessary recklessness is beyond baffling. The fact that Miles Straw ended up turning in the 2025 campaign that he did, something that we all know deep down not even Ross expected, may just make him the luckiest GM currently in professional sports. So, with all of that on the table, and I know there was plenty more I could have pulled on under both categories, the question is, after what the Blue Jays accomplished in 2025, does Ross Atkins deserve an apology? Personally, I feel that unless you were critical of him to the point that you felt everything that he did was terrible, I don't think so. But at the same time, Ross definitely deserves credit for what he has accomplished, even though he's had one of the higher and growing budgets to do it all with, and clearly should not be fired right now. We need to remember that no GM in the history of sports has ever gotten every move right. Bad trades, draft selections that don't work out, and poor free agent signings are part of the seeming nature of the job. But Ross is also very lucky to have still been around in 2025 when things seem to have worked out. What are your thoughts on Ross Atkins? Do you have confidence in him serving as the Blue Jays GM after what the team accomplished in 2025? Let me know in the comments, along with any other key decisions, good or bad, that he's made over the years that come to mind as being worthy of being on this list. And be sure to subscribe for even more baseball content.